Hello everyone. In this video, we'll be learning how to create a whopping 8K terrain using Gaia and CTS. Usually there are issues that arise when doing this kind of thing in an engine, but using Sector, we'll be able to optimize it and take a load of stress off our computing power. So let's get started. In this project, we're using the following assets from procedural worlds: Gaia to generate and paint our terrain, CTS to enhance our terrain textures, and Sector to optimize our terrain by world streaming. Let's start by opening up the Gaia Manager and install all of its dependencies. Go to Window, go to Procedural Worlds, go to Gaia, show Gaia Manager. First things first, we need to select our terrain size, which is 8K meters squared. Then we need to select linear deferred. Now we're ready to create our terrain. Click Create Terrain and Show Stamper. Close the Gaia Manager, and now we have our terrain, our whopping 8K terrain. Let's continue by adding some random stamps to our session manager. So let's go Random Terrain Generator, click Add Stamps, and then click Play Session. Not a bad 8K terrain so far, but it is about to get better. Let's quickly add textures, game objects, and details to our terrain using the spawners in the Gaia Manager. So the Gaia Manager has these Create Spawners option. Click that, and all of these will open up to you. Let's start by selecting the Coverage Texture Spawner and click Spawn. Now our terrain looks pretty good, but I think this terrain needs more trees. Select the Clustered Tree Spawner and click Spawn. While we were at it, we might as well add some game objects. So let's go to the Coverage Game Object Spawner and click Spawn. Let's not forget to add some grass and flower details to our terrain. So let's go to the Coverage Details Spawner and click Spawn. And there we have it. We have our terrain spruced up with details. The next thing we'll do to make things look even better is by adding post effects. So in the Gaia Manager, we have Create Player, Post Effects, Screenshotter, and so on. Let's click that. Go yes. What that's done is it's added a camera into our scene that we can control throughout the game view. It's also added post effects, which is being referenced through the camera, but we can see it in the scene view. If we go to the game view, it's what the camera is seeing so far. And I'm pretty happy with the results. Let's have a quick fly through of our map. So I go through the trees, go through the grounds. We've got all our details and it looks pretty good. It's a little bit latent so far, but that's only because we've got an 8K terrain and it has to view every bit of the assets through the terrain. So the next thing we're going to be focusing on is optimization using Sector. Now that we're happy with the way our terrain looks, I'm going to use Sector to make it run faster through world streaming. To do this, we need to open the Sector terrain window. With this window open, we need to select the current terrain that we're trying to work with, which is the huge terrain that we have. And we need to set up a scale in which we're going to split the terrain. I'm going to choose 8x8 because in this case, it'll work out really well. And I've tried it with other terrains and it worked out really well in other cases, but it depends purely on how you want your level to be loaded. Now it's worth noting that when you sectorize the terrain, which is essentially cutting the terrain, it will delete the main terrain that you have here and replace it with a bunch of little ones. So it's important that you detail, add all of the game objects and all of the trees before you do this process. But like I said before, I'm really happy with the way that I've turned this terrain into a really nicely detailed terrain. So I'm going to sectorize the terrain. As you can see, Sector has completely split our terrain into all these separate terrain tiles. This will make it easier for us to load and unload terrains depending on wherever the player is. In order for Sector to load and unload terrain tiles, we need to attach a special component to our camera in the scene. In this case, it's our flycam. And flycam needs to have a special component which is called the Sector Region Loader. Now the region loader is this nifty little box that surrounds the camera. And what this does is it tells Sector which regions need to be loaded. As you can see, it's pretty small, and we need to increase the size of it to reflect the size of each of the sectors. So in order to do this, I'm going to increase the size from 20 by 20 to 1024 on the X and 1024 on the Z. And now that will load our levels accordingly. Before we can test to see if this works, we need Sector to export all of our terrains. That way the region loader will load each sector accordingly. Open up the sector stream window and select export all sectors. Now that all of our sectors are exported, you shouldn't see any terrains in the scene view. With all of that set up, let's try entering play mode. In order to test if Sector is world streaming properly, I've split my game view and my scene view. I've also turned off the image effects in my scene view. As I drag my player across my level, notice how Sector is actually loading and unloading each scene. There is a little bit of latency, and this is only when you enter new areas. It's worth noting that when you're doing this in the Unity editor, it is really slow. And the reason for this is because the Unity editor has a bit of overhead. A way to fix that issue specifically is by creating a build. When you create a build, you don't have the editor overhead, and things will go much faster. There are other ways that we can improve performance as well. Another way we can improve performance is only by rendering the tiles we are looking at. This can be done by adding a special component to the fly camera. This component is called the Sector Culling Camera. Make sure that the Culling editor is selected. The way this works is it only renders whatever tiles are within the camera's view. To test this, I'm going to rotate the camera's view. Notice how when I look away from tiles, they get unloaded. This does wonders to our performance. So far, we managed to create an 8K terrain. We've added a special camera, which is able to render only the things that we need to see. And Sector has handled all of the work for us in the back end. The next thing I want to do is I want to test whether or not this project works faster in a build. So let's go ahead and go to the project settings. Look for player. And you need to turn off a specific option, which is called optimise mesh data. When turning this off, this will increase the speed of which we are building our project. Lastly, we're going to go File, Build and Run. Save it in a folder called Builds and wait for it to build. To test this, I'm going to use the following build settings. I've also positioned my camera in the highest point I could so we can see if this works or not. As I move around the level, notice how the individual tiles load and unload. It feels quite seamless, but I bet I can push it further. I want to add CTS to the terrain and see whether or not the frames drop or any optimization issues occur. In order to add CTS to our terrains, they need to exist in the scene. And to do this, I'm going to go to the sector window, which is the stream window. Next, I'm going to import all the sectors. Now that we have all of our sectors in the level, we need to add CTS to all of the sections. Go to CTS, add CTS to all terrains. So every terrain is going to have a script attached to it, which is the CTS script. And then lastly, we're going to get the CTS profile to be created and applied to each one of the terrains. CTS is now added to all of the terrains, and the shader looks fantastic. Before we can export and test this, we need to disconnect this profile from every one of the terrains. You could click on each one of the terrains and disconnect the profile, or you could use CTS to do it. Disconnect all terrains. What this does is it will disconnect the profile scriptable objects from each one of the terrains, and any one of the settings that we've applied to all of the terrains are going to be baked. Now that CTS is disconnected, we need to re-export all of the terrains by going to the stream window and clicking export all sectors. Before playing this time, I've actually selected certain sectors to be imported at the beginning of the game. And those sections are the ones in which the camera will start. That way, when the game loads, the player won't accidentally fall through the world. Now let's make a new build and let's test this. As you can see, we have our CTS system in the project. And as we move across our level, new terrains get generated. New terrain tiles get generated, actually. And it loads very well, very seamlessly. And there you have it. That's how we use Sector to do world streaming.